You put on a uniform this morning. Maybe you didn't notice. A work badge, a name tag, a lanyard, a role. You didn't choose who you'd become today. The room did. And in 1971, a psychologist in a Stanford basement proved that the room can turn you into someone you wouldn't recognize. His name was Philip Zimbardo. He wanted to know something simple. Are cruel people born cruel? Or does the situation make them that way? So he built a fake prison in the basement of the psychology building. He recruited ordinary college students, healthy, stable, no history of violence. He flipped a coin, half became guards, half became prisoners. Then he stepped back and watched. Within 6 days, he shut the whole thing down. The guards had turned vicious, not one or two of them, most of them. They stripped prisoners of their names and gave them numbers instead. They forced them into humiliating exercises in the middle of the night. One guard invented a game where prisoners had to simulate degrading acts to earn something as basic as a mattress. These weren't monsters. 2 weeks earlier, they were regular kids studying for exams. What changed? The uniform changed them. The role changed them. The room changed them. This is the part your brain resists. You want to believe cruelty comes from bad character. It's more comfortable that way. If cruelty is a personality flaw, then you're safe because you know your own personality. But Zimbardo's data suggested something colder. Given the right structure, the right permission, the right role, ordinary people slide into behavior they'd condemn in anyone else. Psychologists call this the situationist view of behavior. It means context can overpower character, not always, but far more often than anyone likes to admit. Zimbardo wasn't the first to find this. A decade earlier, a researcher named Stanley Milgram ran a study just a few hundred miles away at Yale. He wanted to understand something that still haunted the post-war world. How did ordinary German citizens participate in the Holocaust? Was there something uniquely broken about them? Milgram suspected not. So he built an experiment. A volunteer sat in front of a machine with switches labeled in rising voltage, up toward a switch marked with a stark warning. A man in a lab coat, an authority figure, instructed the volunteer to deliver shocks to a person in another room whenever they answered a question wrong. The person in the other room was an actor. No one was actually being shocked, but the volunteer didn't know that. Over 60% of participants delivered what they believed were the maximum, most dangerous shocks. Not because they were cruel, because a man in a lab coat told them to continue, and something in their brain treated that instruction as more binding than their own conscience. Here's the plain English version of what's happening in your skull when this occurs. Your brain runs on something researchers call diffusion of responsibility. When someone else appears to be in charge, your brain quietly transfers moral ownership of the outcome onto them. You stop feeling like the author of the action. You start feeling like the instrument. It's why soldiers can carry out orders they'd never conceive of on their own. It's why employees can enforce policies they privately think are unjust. The self doesn't disappear. It just steps aside and lets the role drive. Notice something else in both experiments. The guards weren't given permission to be cruel by a direct order. No one told them to torment the prisoners. They were simply given a uniform, a title, and total anonymity from consequence. That was enough. Psychologist Christopher Browning studied this same pattern decades later, examining ordinary policemen in Nazi-occupied Poland. Ordinary men, middle-aged, not fanatics, not sadists. Given a uniform and an order, most of them became killers within weeks. A minority refused, but most did not. Why does this keep happening across every era and every culture? Because your ancestors needed it to happen. For most of human history, survival depended on group cohesion, not individual moral reasoning. If the tribe's leader gave an instruction, breaking rank could get you exiled, and exile in the ancient world was often a death sentence. Your brain evolved a shortcut: defer to the hierarchy, follow the role. Don't question the structure that's keeping you fed and protected. That shortcut kept your ancestors alive on the savannah. It also, thousands of years later, built concentration camps and turned Stanford undergraduates into tormentors in under a week. The twist is this: Zimbardo himself almost became part of the problem. He wasn't just the experimenter, he assigned himself the role of prison superintendent. And within days, he started thinking like one. He worried about prison security. He grew irritated at a colleague who questioned the ethics of what was happening. It took an outside observer, a young researcher, and a named Christina Masloch, walking in and reacting with horror to snap him back into seeing what his own experiment had become. The man who built the study to prove the power of roles got captured by his own role. Even knowing the mechanism didn't make him immune to it. That should unsettle you a little. It should. Because it means awareness alone isn't protection. You can know exactly how this works and still fall into it, the same way Zimbardo did. What actually breaks the pattern isn't intelligence, it's structure. Studies on obedience since Milgram have found one consistent variable that reduces harmful compliance, the presence of a single dissenting voice, just one. When one person in the room refuses to go along, others become dramatically more likely to refuse too. Cruelty needs unanimity to feel safe. Break the unanimity and the whole system wobbles. Now think about your own life, not a basement in Stanford, not Nazi-occupied Poland, your actual week. Think about the customer service call where the rules felt absurd, but you enforced them anyway because it wasn't your policy. Think about the group chat where a joke crossed a line and you laughed along because everyone else did, and stopping the laughter felt like more of a risk than continuing it. Think about the meeting where you disagreed silently but nodded anyway because contradicting the room felt heavier than staying quiet. You weren't cruel in any of those moments, but you were in miniature wearing the guard's uniform, letting the role drive instead of the self. This isn't a warning that you're secretly a bad person, it's the opposite. It's a warning that goodness was never really the deciding factor. The deciding factor is whether you notice the role you've been handed before you start acting from inside it. The guards who refused to escalate in Zimbardo's prison existed. They were the minority, but they existed, and what separated them wasn't stronger moral character. It was that they kept asking a single quiet question in the middle of the chaos. Would I do this if no one was watching and if the uniform wasn't on? You put on a uniform this morning. You didn't choose who you'd become today, but you can still choose who you'll be inside it.